Something strange happened to boxing. For more than 100 years, the sport belonged to champions, warriors, legends. Then a YouTuber walked in and started making more money than most of them. Not a lifelong amateur boxer, not an Olympic gold medalist. A kid who built his career on pranks, internet drama, and viral videos. And somehow, he turned that into one of the most profitable boxing careers in the world. But here's the uncomfortable question. Did Jake Paul actually change boxing forever? Or did he simply expose something that was already broken? Because if a YouTuber can become one of the biggest draws in the sport, what does that say about boxing itself? And more importantly, what does it say about us? Before Jake Paul entered the ring, boxing had a very specific path. You fought as an amateur, you won national tournaments, maybe you went to the Olympics. Then, after years of grinding, you finally turned professional. That's how legends like Mike Tyson rose. That's how modern stars like Anthony Joshua built their careers. It was a slow climb, painfully slow. But in 2018, something unusual happened. A YouTube rivalry between influencers suddenly turned into a boxing event. Millions of young viewers watched, not because they loved boxing, but because they loved internet drama. And for the first time, promoters realized something terrifying. The audience had changed. The first shock. When Jake Paul announced he was taking boxing seriously, most people laughed. Boxing fans called it a circus. Fighters called it disrespectful. Promoters called it a gimmick. But then, something happened no one expected. His fights started selling. Pay-per-view numbers climbed. Social media exploded. And suddenly, the same people who mocked him started paying attention. Because Jake Paul understood something traditional boxing had ignored for years. In the internet era, attention is the real championship belt. But critics had a point. Jake Paul wasn't fighting professional boxers. His opponents were mostly MMA fighters, athletes like Ben Askren or Tyron Woodley, legends in their sport, but not boxers. So the question became obvious. Was Jake Paul actually good, or was this just smart matchmaking? Because in boxing, there's a huge difference between beating fighters and beating boxers. Then came Anderson Silva. Now, Silva is different. You can't dismiss him the way you dismiss the others. Widely considered the greatest MMA striker of his generation. Fluid, precise, terrifying with his hands. At his peak, he made world-class fighters look like amateurs. But he was also 46 years old when they fought, coming off years away from elite competition. Jake Paul knocked him down, stopped him in the 8th round. It looked impressive. The highlight reel looked real. But the question underneath it stayed the same. Was this proof that Jake Paul was becoming a real boxer? Or was it proof that he was just very good at picking the right version of the right fighter? Because there's a version of Anderson Silva at 36 that makes that night look very different. And everyone in that arena knew it. The knockout that changed everything. Then came the moment that forced everyone to pay attention. The knockout of Tyron Woodley. It wasn't lucky, it wasn't sloppy, it was clean, violent, and suddenly the conversation shifted. Maybe Jake Paul wasn't just a YouTuber playing fighter, maybe he was becoming a real boxer. But that possibility created a new problem, because if Jake Paul was real, then the entire boxing hierarchy suddenly looked very fragile. But just as the hype peaked, reality arrived. Jake Paul faced an actual professional boxer, Tommy Fury. And for the first time in his career, Jake Paul lost. For critics, it was validation. Proof that influencer boxing had limits. Proof that the traditional system still mattered. But strangely, the loss didn't kill the hype. In fact, the event still sold millions. Which raised the deeper question. If losing doesn't matter, then what exactly are fans paying for? The real disruption. This is where Jake Paul's real impact becomes clear. For decades, boxing promotions focused on perfect records, undefeated fighters, carefully protected champions. But Jake Paul flipped that formula. He built his fights around narrative, drama, conflict, internet storytelling. In other words, he didn't sell boxing, he sold attention. And attention is something the internet understands better than any sport. But here's the paradox. Many boxing purists hate Jake Paul. They say he's damaging the sport, turning it into entertainment. But boxing has always been entertainment. The press conferences, the trash talk, the rivalries, even legends like Muhammad Ali understood this. Ali didn't just fight opponents, he fought narratives. And Jake Paul might be doing the same thing, just in a digital language. Let me ask you something directly. If millions of new young fans are watching boxing because of Jake Paul, is that actually bad for the sport? Or are boxing fans angry because someone broke the old rules? The attention economy. Because Jake Paul didn't just enter boxing, he brought the entire internet with him. YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, millions of viewers who never watched a single title fight. Suddenly, boxing wasn't competing with other sports. It was competing with the entire internet, and Jake Paul knew exactly how to play that game. Then came Mike Tyson, not just any legend, the most feared heavyweight in boxing history. The man who once made grown men quit before the first bell. Jake Paul fought Mike Tyson on Netflix, live, in front of over 60 million households simultaneously. That number had never happened in boxing, ever. Not for Ali, not for Foreman, not for any fight in the sport's 100-year history. Was it competitive? No. Tyson was 58 years old, moving carefully, fighting cautiously. The version of Iron Mike that paralyzed the sport in the 1980s was not in that ring. But 60 million people watched anyway, and that's the point. Jake Paul didn't need the best version of Mike Tyson. He just needed Mike Tyson's name, and the internet did the rest. Then came the fight that nobody in the traditional boxing world was ready for. Anthony Joshua, a two-time unified heavyweight world champion, Olympic gold medalist, one of the most decorated boxers of his generation. Not an MMA crossover, not a 58-year-old legend past his prime. A real, active world champion. And Joshua knocked Jake Paul out. Clean, decisive, no controversy. For the traditional boxing world, it felt like the correction had finally arrived. Real credentials beat internet fame. The hierarchy held. But here's the uncomfortable part. To prove that point, a two-time world heavyweight champion had to share a ring with a YouTuber. Think about what that means. Anthony Joshua, to defend boxing's legitimacy, needed Jake Paul to do it. Who really won that argument? But here's the even more uncomfortable part. Maybe Jake Paul didn't change boxing at all. Maybe he just revealed what modern sports are becoming. Ending. Think about it. If a YouTuber can become one of the biggest draws in boxing, what happens next? Will future champions need viral followers before they ever step into the ring? Will the biggest fights be decided by skill or by algorithms? And if attention really is the most valuable currency in sports, then the real question isn't whether Jake Paul belongs in boxing. The real question is, how many more Jake Pauls are coming? And when they arrive, will boxing still be boxing, or will it become something else entirely? Comment below what you think. And if you enjoy deep sports documentaries like this, subscribe to our channel, because the next story might change how you see sports forever.